Today, we're diving into a modern crisis with some seriously deep roots. We're talking about how Japan, a country that's practically synonymous with rice, suddenly saw its supermarket shelves go bare. And the craziest part? It all traces back to a government policy that was in place for half a century.
So you have to ask, right? How on earth could a nation so tied to rice just run out? Well, as you'll see, the answer is a lot more complicated than just a spell of bad weather.
The crisis pretty quickly got a nickname, the Reiwa Rice Riots. It's actually a callback to a similar panic back in 1993. This was a massive wake-up call, and it really exposed a huge vulnerability in Japan's food supply.
Okay, so first, let's take a look at how this whole thing actually played out for everyday people.
You know, this didn't just happen overnight. The first warning signs started popping up around May 2024. But by August, boom, it hit a breaking point. Shelves were empty and prices just shot through the roof. Even after the new harvest came in, prices just kept on climbing right into the new year.
And the economic shock was, well, it was huge. Prices for rice didn't just creep up, they nearly doubled. For a lot of families, a staple food suddenly felt like a luxury item. And you can imagine the pressure that put on restaurants and the entire food industry. But here's the real kicker. This wasn't just some random event. No, this crisis was the totally predictable outcome of a very deliberate government policy that had been running for 50 years.
It all comes down to this one policy, called Gentan. It actually started way back in 1970, and the goal seemed logical at the time. Japan was producing too much rice. So the government literally started paying farmers not to grow it. The idea was to keep prices high and stable, to protect farmers' income. And right here, you can see the fundamental problem with Gentan. The intention was good, right? Help out the farmers. But the result, well, it created a system that was incredibly brittle, that couldn't handle any kind of shock. It ended up being a direct threat to the country's food security.
So under the Gentan policy, Japan's rice production was very carefully managed. It hovered right around 6.7 million tons a year, basically just enough to meet demand.
But, and this is a huge but, the country has the land, it has the technology, it has the know-how to produce over 10 million tons of rice. The Gentan policy was essentially forcing a massive amount of farmland to sit idle, leaving absolutely no buffer for a crisis.
So the 2024 crisis forced everyone's hand. The government had to make this dramatic, historic U-turn, pivoting away from 50 years of managed decline and toward a whole new era of abundance.
The official turning point came on August 5, 2025. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba made this announcement, and the language couldn't have been clearer. The era of paying farmers to not grow rice was over. The new mission was to help them grow as much as they could.
So the new blueprint is pretty simple. It attacks the old system on 3 fronts. First, just end the 50-year-old reduction policy. Done. Second, completely overhaul the subsidies. Instead of paying for empty fields, they're now going to support productive, competitive crops. And third, they're pushing hard for innovation. Things like heat-resistant rice and smart farming to deal with today's challenges.
But, increasing production brings up a new question. What are we going to do with all this extra rice? And the answer is a really bold new strategy: to turn Japanese rice into a global product.
And the ambition here is, well, it's massive. The government wants to boost exports from about 46,000 tons all the way up to 350,000 tons by 2030. That's a nearly 8-fold jump. It's huge.
Now, this isn't just about making money. It's actually a super clever food security strategy. See, by building up a big export market when times are good, Japan creates a strategic surplus. So if a crisis ever hits, all that rice that was supposed to be shipped overseas can be immediately rerouted to feed people at home.
Okay, but there is one giant hurdle: the price. Because of those decades of the Gentan policy, Japanese rice is up to 4 times more expensive than its competition on the world market. If they're going to succeed in exporting, they have to figure out how to bring those production costs way, way down.
And this brings us to the bigger picture. This massive policy change is about so much more than just the price of a bag of rice. It's really about the fundamental security of the entire nation.
38%. That's it. That's Japan's overall food self-sufficiency rate, measured by calories.
That number tells you everything you need to know. The country is incredibly dependent on other countries for its food.
And if you think about a worst-case scenario, like a conflict that cuts off shipping lanes, the results would be, well, catastrophic. Imports of everything from wheat and beef to animal feed would just stop. Entire industries would collapse. The population would be forced onto what's basically an emergency diet.
This right here shows a critical emergency gap. In a full-blown crisis, experts figure Japan would need about 16 million tons of rice for national rationing. Right now, even when you count everything, all production and all reserves, it has less than half of that. That is the vulnerability this new policy is desperately trying to fix.
The plan is bold, and the need is crystal clear. So what's the single biggest thing standing in the way of making this happen?
Well, the biggest obstacle is a political machine that's often called the agricultural triangle. For 50 years, you've had this powerful team of politicians, bureaucrats, and farm co-ops, all working together to protect that old Gentan system, because, hey, it benefited them. Taking on that powerful interest group is the new policy's greatest challenge, for sure.
The Reiwa rice riots taught Japan a really powerful lesson about the dangers of a broken policy. The question that remains now is whether this bold new vision for growing more can actually beat a half-century of politics and tradition to truly secure the nation's future.